Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Impacting Coffee this morning and the first week of April. Oh my gosh, it is April. It is April. I'm Robert Nelson. I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Michael Green. How are you, Michael?
Hey, good morning, Robert. Good morning, everybody. I'm doing well, thank you. Glad that spring is in the air. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I'll tell you what Impacting Coffee is. It's an open, welcoming conversation to exchange stories and ideas, to foster innovation, to strengthen the nonprofit sector, and to build community. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying we are a nonprofit meetup. We like to get together to do networking and meet people in the nonprofit community who are doing great things and find areas for collaboration. So it's pretty cool. Going on for a little over 5 years, and so we're very excited that it has had this momentum to keep going. So that's pretty awesome. So yeah, today we always like to celebrate Gratitude Tuesday. So I would encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat and also say something that you're grateful for. Robert, we can start with you. What are you grateful for on this beautiful Tuesday?
Oh my. I'm grateful for long weekends. I just came back from a long weekend with my family. We went to Tucson and visited some family we haven't seen in a long time since the pandemic started. So it was really great to be able to do that and reconnect and see a whole lot of family members over the weekend and just be with them and also just eat, celebrate being with family. So what about you? What are you grateful for today?
I am grateful for the extra sunlight we have in the evenings now. We haven't had Impacting Coffee in a while, and so time change happened, about a month ago. But I definitely like this time of the time change. So yeah, I'm happy for more sunlight in the afternoon. So yeah, again, I would encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat and also put what you're grateful for. Let's see. Robert, would you like to tell us about the Next Gen In grant?
Of course. So thanks to our good friends at P&M Resource Foundation, we are recipients of the Next Gen In Award, which is a nonprofit capacity building award for organizations for youth, actually under the age of 25. So we've been awarding different organizations throughout. One of our last awards was with Food Depot, so to establish food building food distribution capacity up in northern New Mexico. And they will be back here, actually, I believe. I don't know. Sorry, excuse me. They presented last month, and we'll probably hopefully have them back to talk a little bit more about their project here soon. So we're excited to hear some of the work that's being done up there to provide food for families up in northern New Mexico, especially. And so if you have any questions about it, I believe that we're giving away $2,500 awards, and it's a very short application process. We do some review of it, and then if there's anything that we try to work with folks around it. So Mike, was there anything you want to add to that? Or
no, I think you covered it all. Yeah, so if you know anybody who's interested, have them check it out. Danny just dropped the link in chat, so if you or somebody you know are interested in that Next Gen In grant, you can find some more information on our website there.
Mike, do you want to talk a little bit about the community survey that we're offering too?
Definitely, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, Impacting Coffee has been around for a little over 5 years, and so we've kind of done things the same way for a while, where we have the first 3 Tuesdays of the month we get together, and we know that during a pandemic people's needs have changed, and so we're trying to figure out ways that Impacting Coffee can best serve our nonprofit community. So we have a survey. I'll drop the link in the chat here in just a second, but we would really appreciate your feedback on how we can improve Impacting Coffee to better serve you. So yeah, please take a moment to fill that out, because that'll really help us decide the direction that Impacting Coffee will go here in the next year or so. So yeah, definitely please help us. Please give us some feedback. As much information as you can share with us, we would appreciate. So yeah, again, I'll drop that link in here in just a second.
Thanks, Michael. Also, Impacting Coffee is looking for, we're recruiting volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering with our planning team, let us know. You can email me. I can share my email in the chat, or Michael or any one of our teammates too. We're just looking for somebody that can help with our planning and coordinating of Impact and Coffee as we go forward with our programming. So, and that survey will help us understand too what more of what our programming will be changing to, or staying the same in any way, shape, or form. Thanks, Michael. But with that, I think we're good to pass to our guests today. Please give a warm Impact and Coffee virtual welcome to Jessie Calero and Yvette Tovar. They're with AFP. We're so glad that they could be guests today. I'm just going to add you all as spotlights really quick, and we'll go from there. But good morning, y'all. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Good morning. Nice to see you all.
Well, awesome. I'm really excited to speak to everyone today. Like they said, we're with the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and we're here to talk a lot about the new normal as fundraising professionals, which I want to offer a caveat of that has looked different for everyone based on what sector of the nonprofit world people are working in, even what nonprofit people are a part of. And the information that I plan to share is more anecdotal. AFP has tried to do a lot of information gathering and a lot of listening, especially over the past 2 years. And some of it is very hard data, but some of it is more based on people's experiences and what we've noticed as patterns. And so I want to offer that as a disclaimer. But some of the things that we've really noticed in a fundraising world that is adjusting to COVID-19, a lot of fundraising professionals have really asked for and benefited from accessible and affordable professional development opportunities. We are a professional association, so we encourage people to join if they are financially capable of that. But we made a concerted effort in 2020 and 2021 to offer everything that we do with options for those who were not able to afford it. We knew that a lot of nonprofits' budgets in terms of professional development and things of that nature were shifting or were cut in order to prioritize direct services when they were needed most. And so we did not want people in the fundraising realm to go without training or resources, or even just, a shoulder to lean on during a time when they were not able to afford it. And so we offered a lot of our programming using a pay what you can model, or using a low cost model where people could self-select our typical pricing, or a $5 price where they could participate in a workshop at that low cost. And about a third of the people who registered for our programming throughout the year, we had about 275 people participate in our programming throughout the year in 2021. And about a third of those, a little bit more than that, chose to access our programming at low or no cost. So that really told us this is a resource that people value and that they need. And there were others who were not in that position and who were a little more generous, who would toss in a little bit extra when they were registering, which we really appreciated. Another pattern that we've seen is changes in just sort of the employment landscape in fundraising. There are a lot of people who left the sector. A lot of folks are re-examining their work during this time, when the world is in the midst of a lot of unrest and difficulty and struggle. It really makes you think about what is important, what do I want to be doing, what feeds me, and where am I valued as well. And so we've seen a lot of people leave fundraising. We've seen a lot of increased wages and benefits for fundraisers, which is a great trend to look at. It's a lot more competitive for agencies to recruit a new fundraiser and to retain them. And I think people are really starting to see the value of development. While it's important to diversify as a nonprofit where your funding is coming from, whether it's government contracts, things of that nature, earned income, fundraisers were really leaned on during this time and really came through to get those dollars where they could to make sure that direct services continued. And so that is a positive trend that I hope continues. I hope agencies continue to realize the role fundraisers play and the specialized skills that we bring to the table. And so that's a highlight, I would say. Another pattern I've seen is a lot of shifting in the funder nonprofit dynamics and a lot of examination and conversations that maybe weren't comfortable to have in the past, or it didn't feel like there was a space for that conversation. But there's a lot of funders who are looking at what sort of extensive reporting are we asking of the people we fund? What does our grant application look like? With AFP, we really asked funders who participated in our funders forum to think about how many hours do you think are going into writing your application, and then asking nonprofits to think about how many hours are you spending on this application, and sort of adding that up, because that can become an extractive practice. If you have a grant that takes 30 hours of work and awards roughly $2,000, and there are 100 nonprofits that apply every year, that's a significant amount of money and labor that's being expended on your granting process. And so how can you examine that and think, how can we do this differently? How can we be more strategic? And also looking at, like, what are we costing the nonprofit world? How do we shift this dynamic? How can we make things easier and more equitable? And so I think that shift has been really valuable. And thinking about, if we get 100 applications, if we don't have the capacity to notify the 96 people who are not awarded, do we have any business asking for all of this labor if we can't expend the 15 minutes it takes to draft an email and send that out in response, those types of things. But I've also seen funders really listening carefully to nonprofits, which is really exciting. And I don't want to imply that that was not happening before, but I feel like the pandemic has really opened up this dialogue that has become normal of, how are you doing? Okay, how are you really doing? And it's opened that up between individuals and between funders and nonprofits. There's been this sort of nonprofit mask that we all put on of, like, everything's fine at my organization and we don't need anything. We're doing great. We need money as always, but everything is fine. And there was no opportunity to be like, we are really struggling with recruiting staff, and our staff deliver our direct support. And without our staff, our services don't exist, or we cannot source disinfectant and our staff are being exposed in X, Y, and Z ways to COVID-19 and have no resources, or accessing PPE, or all of these different problems that some are new and some have just been exacerbated. But being really frank with funders and saying, this is what we really need, and this is the challenge we really face, and these are some of the larger problems we have not been able to solve. And funders really taking that back to their boards, to their organizations, and really being strategic about how to meet those needs. So I would say that's another really, really positive impact. Another re-examination we've done that is still ongoing is really looking at National Philanthropy Day, which is something we've gotten some resistance from, some vocal recognition. But we've really wanted to be thoughtful about, especially during a global pandemic that is not over, despite how much we desperately want it to be. What does that look like in order to be a true celebration of community change, rather than an excuse for being sort of self-aggrandizing in the philanthropic world? How can we really center the goals of philanthropy rather than centering the celebration of individual donors or the accumulation of wealth? because in my experience, and I've talked with other development professionals, really those who have the least amount of wealth have increased the frequency and size of their gifts over the pandemic. And there have been those with a lot of wealth who have also been generous, but proportionally, some of the populations who arguably could be receiving nonprofit support have invested heavily in their communities. And that doesn't often get much recognition. They don't usually get a plaque or a celebratory event. And so looking at what does a celebration of philanthropy that's really authentic look like, that process, like I said, is ongoing, but that has been another priority for AFP this year. And I feel like I have talked a whole bunch. I'm going to let Yvette chime in with her thoughts as well. And of course, we would love for this to be a really great conversation with questions and thoughts from everyone else.
Thank you, Jessie. You did, that was a really great summary. So I just have a little bit to add. I just saw Jermaine's question about how we notice an enormous increase in fundraising goals. I would say we have noticed that organizations want an increase. Whether or not an organization was able to achieve those goals is perhaps the better question in these last 2 years. I think that in the first, say, 6 to 8 months, definitely in the year 2020, once the pandemic was fully present and we were all experiencing lockdown, there was enough cautiousness and trepidation on the part of donors that giving really slowed down, and it surged at the end of the year, the calendar year in December, with the traditional annual fundraising campaign that most nonprofits support and promote. We saw it happen again in 21, where the number of donors giving is solid and it's high, but the average gift amount had waned a bit. And so the way we feel collectively about what's happening in our world, whether it's the larger in our country globally, but in our community within Albuquerque, within your family, within your school community, if you have school-age children, right, can really vary. And we saw that the stress of that did spill over into how donors felt, right, and sort of their caution, although they were still being asked. So what we're saying to fundraising professionals, you don't stop asking. But we had to stand in the truth of where we were as a community, large and small, and know that there were some unpredictable things happening that we couldn't entirely forecast, whether it was about events. How do you plan events happening indoors when there are variants happening, and events take 6 to 12 months of planning, right? Some practical realities. How do you pivot for that, right? Do you plan outdoor events? Do you plan semi-outdoor events, right? What kind of flexibility do you need to have as a development professional in your organization, and what resources does it take in order to be able to pivot that way? I would add, just so we can open it up to questions, the only other thing I would say that was really revealed in the last 2 years was the divide between urban and rural in our state, and that a lot of our programming was in-person programming, right? But it was very Albuquerque centric and Albuquerque and the surrounding areas. So if you happen to be regionally in this part of the state, then access to programming, which was usually in person, was readily available. Not so much if you lived in the rural parts of the state. So what shifted with the pandemic is that all programming became virtual. And in so doing, what it did is it opened it up, not only financially to be feasible for folks, depending on what situation their organization was in and their ability to support their professional development, but to just make it accessible to all. And so when we're looking at this profession through an equity lens, that very much offered equity, right? That everybody could come to the table, ask the questions, talk in the chat, how's it going, make connections, network, where they could follow up with email after the event and connect with people, so that they too were drawing on the available resources that AFP New Mexico offers for development professionals. So with that, I'll stop. And Robert, I don't know how you want to go. If you want to invite questions, we defer to you.
Absolutely. So if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat like Jermaine did, or you're welcome to unmute yourself, and we welcome you to the conversation. I heard somebody unmute. And I heard, oh, Paula, hi, good morning. You raised your hand. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Robert. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Hi, my question here, I'll lower my hand. Sorry, I can't walk and chew gum. So good morning. My one comment is that I really appreciate the part about being able to, with Zoom, reach farther, or with online platforms, I should say, reach farther. And I hope that we as a community really learn how to do hybrid events from now on, right? Like we figure that out, because that reach is just incredible and important because of our state, especially with the urban and rural mix. So I think we're all trying to learn, how do we do hybrid now, right? So.
Right. No, hi, Paula. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
So totally agree with what you're saying. And I think that some recent conversations we've been having, Jessie mentioned about National Philanthropy Day, right? And what it has traditionally and historically been. And we're talking about what is it going to look like this year? So it does appear that we're opening back up, we're having in-person events, but you're right. Let's take the lesson learned about equity and accessibility and inclusion, right? That's really what that amounts to in the end, right? And I think you're right. It's incumbent upon us to now have a hybrid event, so that if you're able to come in person, great, let's celebrate. But to celebrate means to include, right? To have community and celebrate community and the incredible professionals who are in this profession. It's hard work, right? And they work at it. How do we support all of you in the state, not just those that happen to live within a certain mile radius of Albuquerque, right? So I think you're absolutely right, Paula. So
Yep. So my question is, it seems like there's a whole lot of money in government right now to be gotten, but it sure seems like it's gotten, and I mean, I haven't been in fundraising that long, but it sure seems like it's even a more onerous or confused process to get it. Am I?
Yeah.
I mean, has anyone cracked the code on it?
No, I'm sure Jessie and I can both comment. I'll just briefly comment, and then Jessie, please add. So for what we've said earlier about this, what I think are shifting dynamics between funders and grantees, right, that Jessie referenced, that really stemmed from the Funders Forum last year, but it was also born out of what we witnessed in 2020, which was that all of a sudden funders were sending money to nonprofits almost unbidden, right? Or we have lots of money, we're going to turn it around in a 30-day process. Whereas previous to that, right, it was a longer application process. And so what we witnessed is that organizations, in terms of foundations and corporate giving, were able to give very quickly, which kind of just made you think, how is this possible? What happens in the regular grant cycle season, right? But I think that when it comes to municipal monies, that didn't happen. So I'm going to stop and let Jessie add to that. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think on a federal level, like Robert said, it's a very cumbersome process. It's very inaccessible. And I found that it really kind of prioritizes larger organizations. And having worked at Mandy's Farm for over 10 years, I was there when we were a little baby organization that didn't even require an audit. And now we're at like $3.5 million a year in terms of our annual budget. So I feel like I've gotten a peek at what it feels like to be a teeny organization and what it feels like to be more of like a mid-size or large organization. And the federal dollars are far more accessible now as we've grown to be a larger organization. I don't know that we could have ever fully accessed those as a small organization because there are just some processes and some gatekeeping that happens that just kind of knock you out of the mix. And I would say there is this like influx of funding, but there's a lot of confusion about what to do with it and how to release it and how to prioritize who gets it. And so it's created a lot. I agree with what Yvette said of like foundations and corporations were like, okay, we have money, we're going to get it out, we're going to do this. And then on the government side of things, there's just been a lot of hesitation, obviously bureaucracy. There has been some hiccups in that process, to say the least. Some of the relief grants, that was not the case. But for the most part, I would say that government funding has still been fairly onerous. I did want to, I saw Jermaine put something in the chat. She said that we mentioned the shift in conversations with funders, and have we noticed a shift in meaningful conversations with donors? And I would say largely yes. It's that same conversation of how are you doing? How are you really doing? And it's been good to ask donors that, especially small business owners in our community, because I feel like Albuquerque and throughout New Mexico, we have these really committed small business owners who maybe don't have the padding of a large corporation, but boy, are they enthusiastic about supporting their community, and they will give money that they have. And in this time, I found myself having a lot of conversations where people were apologizing because they just didn't have that cash. And I found myself being like, oh my gosh, do not apologize. Like, you have always supported our work. The pandemic is impacting you as well, you know, especially restaurants and things like that. And so there was a lot of earnestness on both sides for those whose capacity had significantly changed. That only made me respect them more, that they were so frank and that they said, this has nothing to do with how much we love our community or support your work. This has to do with us struggling during this time as well.
So I think Jermaine has another comment in there, and someone has their hand raised. Katie Stone, I just saw it. Katie.
Howdy.
Hi.
I'd be on video, but I'm not quite ready for prime time. I am a tiny nonprofit, and I just want to second how hard it's been to get federal funding. I mean, those of you who know my work know that I'm a shoo-in for CPB funding, Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding. I literally do the same work that's being done by giant media companies, but I'm tiny. And I cannot tap into CPB funds, even after having professional grant writers write those grants, even though I'm such a shoo-in. So you're absolutely right about federal decision makers just discard tiny organizations like us. That's what I've decided. Even though we have an impact that's just as large as some of these bigger companies, doesn't even matter. We're just being pushed aside. But that aside, I have found that the state channels to access those federal funds, so the ARA grants and things like that that are coming through different state channels, have been a bit more accessible for us as tiny grantees. So just keeping an eye on those ARA opportunities inside the state of New Mexico, it seems like we're given, our tininess actually is good. It seems like for those state agencies, especially if you, like us, are working statewide. I had a question for you guys about our boards. I feel like I just love my board. They've stuck with me through this really hard time. You know, we've tried to make it super easy. I went from having these lovely board meetings where I'd make these little gourmet lunches for everyone at my house to forget it, you're all on Zoom, you know, good luck, bring a pencil. So we ask our boards to do so much for us. And in the last 2 years, I have really backed off with asking my board to help me fundraise, because it seems like my board, when I bring up fundraising, and how we have to be so clever and come up, like, scrapped all of our live fundraising plans like everyone else. It's so much to ask of them right now. All of them are dealing with their own getting through the pandemic, and we are kind of moving out of that. But 2 questions. Generally, I like my board to be super diverse, and that means economically diverse. And so many grantors say your whole board has to donate. I agree. I have some board members, though, that really couldn't donate more than $5, but I value them and want them. So the questions are kind of big. First of all, how do you make sure that you don't alienate people from your board because you're looking at them as possible donors? And which is, I hate looking at people like that. Second of all, how do we ask our boards to help us with fundraising right now when, they're just as confused about what we can possibly commit to right now? And then I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Katie. There was a lot in there.
Yeah, that was a lot of good
Let
stuff.
me take a stab at that. I would say on a fundamental level, Katie, when you are recruiting people to be on your board, part of what board service is in its basic definition is to fundraise, right? So I would offer that, and especially when you're a small organization, it's the difference between whether you're putting together a working board versus a governance board, right? And smaller organizations are typically working boards because you are getting it going. You are trying to network in your community. You are trying to fundraise. You're trying to get the name out. You want people to know about the work you do, right? And so that takes a lot of folks really leveraging their circle of influence in the community, in their worlds, right, to speak to the work of your organization. I think that fundraising is inherently part of the description of a board member, and it's a very reasonable one. But it should also be something that's very much a part of the conversation in the recruitment process, so that prospective board members understand what it is that you are needing and what the expectations are. Right. So with that said, I will also say this. Yes, we need to say that our boards are 100% giving in our applications for funding. $5 makes you 100% giving. So if having board members that have different socioeconomics is important on your board, and that just happens to be what your organization is focused on, that's totally fine. It's not about how much they're giving, it's the fact that they're giving, and that you need to be able to leverage the statement, yes, our organization's work and our mission is so important that our board members have all committed, right? And so we need to solicit further support, springboarding off of what your board of directors has already accomplished in that regard, right? With that said, I will also say that not everybody, and oftentimes not all board members are comfortable doing a direct ask, right? That's just not their thing. They might totally be willing to introduce you to people to leverage their circle of influence, but you need to offer, hey, if you can broker that introduction, I'm happy to be the spokesperson and to be at that conversation, Zoom, in person, whatever it is, and that you are the person doing the ask, right? It is about meeting people where they're at. And I think it's also about respecting and understanding the volunteers, right? And to what degree are we asking them to give of their time, talent, and treasure, right? There's a reasonable expectation, but I do think that sometimes we ask a lot of board members who have very busy lives and who have also been impacted by the pandemic and all that that means, emotional, mental energy, and financial contribution. So Jessie, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to add that we've done a lot of advocacy at AFP around this of, if we want to prioritize a diverse board, if we want to engage people from all economic backgrounds, people with and without disabilities, people of all racial backgrounds, people of all ages, we really need to re-examine what we're requiring of boards. And so what is meaningful, that can be different for different people. And that should be determined by the organization, because each of our organizations have different needs. So funders might ask, are all of your board members engaged in a meaningful way, providing meaningful contributions? We know what that looks like for each person. And so we should be able to have that option. And I'm glad that funders are moving away from that, because there are some funders who would say, does each board member give X dollar amount or more? And that can box a lot of people out. Like, I have served on boards and I just don't have the capacity to give multi-figure gifts every year to participate on a board, but I can volunteer my time and I have a lot of skills that are of value. I volunteered as a grant writer for organizations and things like that, and that has a value and a return on investment. And so when we shift those benchmarks, we allow more people to participate. And especially if we're engaging younger folks or even elderly folks who may be on a limited income, their time and contributions, again, are valuable, but the capacity may just not be there at that point in their life. And so I agree with the efforts to diversify what an engaged board looks like. I think it was Jermaine had another question we didn't tackle.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
Being a board member and a board member for the organization that Yvette so well represents, I think it's also a really good practice to stay in touch with the board. So when Christina Ford, who's the executive director of Alfay, I think she does the best at this, and I've been on a lot of boards. But before you even get considered as a board member, she meets with you one-on-one and lays out the expectations of what's expected, and you get it. Don't come be on this board if you can't meet this, right? It's no harm done, right? So one is clarity up front. And then two, periodically once a year, her and the president of the board come meet with you. And I just recently retired from a corporate job and now I'm running a nonprofit. So our conversation this year was, okay, how's my giving going to change, right? And so also to be upfront with that with board members. And I give a lot of in-kind too. So Jessie, absolutely in-kind, meaningful, where Yvette says $5 is meaningful for some. But I think it's staying in conversation with board members on a regular basis about their participation, because life changes, right? So
I
Thank
agree.
you, Paula. Thank you. Stacy, I know your hand has been up forever and a day, and
Yeah,
you've
sorry.
been so patient. No, go for it.
Sorry, Mr. Sacco.
Oh, gosh. No, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So just real quick, since you brought up that other topic, I've been on a lot of boards too, Paula, and it's interesting. It's ranged from they're saying, well, you got to give so much money to be on our board to help us find that money. So that might have been just introductions. And then when I was on the Professional Aerospace Contractors Board, we had a couple of folks that were lawyers that would do in-kind work for us, but we would value it. It was always a problem coming up with, well, what's that real number? I mean, dollar per hour or whatever. But then they would give us as much, an equivalent amount of money in a sense as in-kind. And we'd write a letter back to them and say, thank you for your support. This is what we value that as. And it helped them, I assume, with their taxes. But my real question was back to what you said in the beginning, Paul, about all the different grantee programs and areas where people can apply for monies from the government programs. When I first moved back to Albuquerque, there used to be all kinds of courses on how to apply for grants. And I haven't seen any workshops so much on that more recently. And I thought, is AFP offering anything like that now, whether it's local or national? And especially what you were saying, Paula, there's a lot of other programs, not at the federal level, but local here with the city. Well, I'd love to go to a workshop on how to get money through the cities, like city council, they have funding. And so is there anybody doing that? I'd just be curious, and I'm happy to promote that out to all my lists when you guys, if there's somebody that does that or something you guys do, I'd love to promote what you're doing. So that's just the idea about that was my question. Thank you.
Well, I love that question. And I want to highlight where I got the bulk of my experience in grant writing and experienced a huge upswing in the return on our grants was when we participated in the Grants Collective, which is now Pivotal New Mexico, correct, Robert? Yes. I was telling him this morning, I was like, I know the new name and it flew out of my head, but it's back. My organization sent me to their talent academy, where they do a really deep dive, especially along the lines of federal grants, which for my organization at that time, we were growing steadily, and it was really looking like, hey, we could start really prioritizing some federal grants. But all of my grant writing experience was with local funders, small businesses and foundations and things of that nature. And so the Talent Academy really dived into the nuts and bolts of how do you even apply for federal funding? What does a solid grant application look like? How do you use effective storytelling in this grant writing world, where it's like, here's how many letters you can use, here's what we're asking for, how do you adapt to what different funders are asking for? And I cannot say enough what a return on investment that had for our organization, for me to go to that. I left with so much more confidence, and our grant writing has really increased in success. And so I would give them a shout out and center them. But there has been increased interest recently in AFP providing some more grant writing training, just because so many folks are like a one-person shop. That's what I am right now, of you're doing major gifts, planned giving, events, grants, you're sort of balancing all these different hats, and no one is good at everything. So we all kind of need some of that background. And so I think that's an excellent suggestion, and something we can prioritize in 2022, is providing some of that, especially for smaller organizations, where I feel like, with just a little bit of support, they could really be pulling in some larger grants to support their work. And so I appreciate you mentioning that. Yvette, did you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered that quite thoroughly. So, but it's interesting to hear what you said, Stacy, because we are looking at programming for the remaining part of this calendar year. And so as we go back to our program committee and we're talking about what is it we need to be offering, we're trying to assess the needs of AFP members. And I don't think you can have too many resources, right? So folks plug in the way in where they are aware of opportunities happening. So I appreciate it. Was a good question. Good food for thought. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other hands up unless somebody does, or just unmute yourself. Otherwise, there's a couple of comments maybe in the chat.
Yeah, I think there are a couple in the chat we can cover.
Kurt, I really like your comment that you have about the 3 W's: wisdom, wealth, and workers. In board members. That's a nice way to put that. I liked that. It was eloquent. So the other comment I saw that Jermaine has that we haven't really spoken to is about, she says, any suggestions on sustaining the inclusive conversations that have taken place between corporations and nonprofit communities throughout the pandemic. So I think this is one that I would invite folks to also, offer their observations on, not just about what Jessie and I have to think about it. Of course, we have an opinion, because we always have an opinion, but I would say the starting point for AFP, Jermaine, was, well, that's not the starting point. It's like a midpoint. That's not right to say that. The Funders Forum that we had last fall, which occurred over a 3-week period, I think really invited funders to come to the table, and inviting them to be open to what are your processes about how you request applications, how do you process them, how do you decide who to award, how onerous is it valid, can it be valid to ask for money to pay the electric bill, right? Everybody wants to hear about programming, but if you don't support those who are the direct care providers of your mission, which is a place to work that's decent, isn't falling apart, their heating and cooling are working, right? That's also supporting the mission. And I think that we will continue as the New Mexico chapter of AFP to invite funders to the table and to invite grantees to also feel like perhaps they can participate in that kind of conversation with funders. So we know that historically the relationship and dynamic between funders and grantees is sort of like the funders are here and the grantees are here. And so we're really trying to push that it be more like this, because in reality, it's a collaboration, right? Without the nonprofits doing the incredible work of their mission, right, the funders can't achieve the goals of trying to support areas that they are interested in supporting. So that's not an easy conversation necessarily to have, but I think AFP, and Jessie was the moderator of those sessions last fall, and I think she did a really good job of kind of very bluntly saying, you know what, the winds of change are here. Things cannot go back necessarily to the way they were pre-pandemic. What are the lessons learned for all of us? And how can we come to the table in true collaboration and partnership, right, to further both the mission of the funder and the mission of the nonprofit? Jessie, what do you think?
I love everything that you said, and I love this dynamic of just sort of bringing those two positions of funder and nonprofit and having it be more lateral, where you are talking to a partner and talking to a resource, and they recognize you as an expert in what you are doing, and it's much more of a dialogue rather than the dynamic that has existed in the past, where, okay, we tell you what you need to do to get money, and then we just say, oh, everything's great, we got the money, we would like more, you know, really being more frank and more transparent and more open. One real shift that I noticed for my organization that I was very excited about is, in the past, it's sort of been like, we will fund supplies, or we will fund just very specific things that don't necessarily deliver the services. But in the pandemic, we were able to have conversations about who our staff are and how the pandemic impacted them, that funders then invested in that, of talking about how direct care providers are majority women of color. They are working multiple jobs. They are in multi-generational households, caring for parents and children while also doing their work. That a lot of these folks were impacted by the disruptions in the gig economy. Like, a lot of our staff were Uber drivers or things like that on the side. And a lot of that work dried up when people weren't going places. Some of the things that really challenged our workers, and they continue to show up anyway. We've seen the patterns of rising wages, which I am thrilled by, but it becomes more and more frustrating that our staff are there doing labor that is emotionally and physically demanding, and they're getting paid less than someone who's, you know, doing retail and gets to go home and kind of check out of the work. You know, people don't go home from Target and they're like, well, I don't know, is the Montgomery Target going to be all right when I'm gone? You know, they can go home and be themselves, but our caregivers, they get those calls saying, hey, can you pick up another shift? They are invested in the people they support and they worry about them. We had so many staff who lost family due to COVID. We had staff who called and said, my son just died and I just need a couple days off. Is everything going to be okay while I'm gone? Those situations where it's like, you know, yeah, of course. And why is this set up so that you feel like you cannot take time for yourself, or you don't have PTO, or you don't have resources like this to create a safety net? And I hope that that pattern continues, where funders will invest in employee assistance programs, increased wages, better benefits, things like that, that attract people to the work and keep them there. Because we've seen that when there's high turnover, we don't meet the people's needs that we are saying we are supporting. When we keep people there who are experienced and who are experts in their field, we deliver higher quality services and have more effective outcomes. And we can't do that if we're paying poverty wages. That's my whole soapbox lecture on direct support staff and nonprofit work not getting paid enough. But I'm glad that funders are paying attention to it and seeing the value in it. as a result of the pandemic. I see a hand. Kurt, did you want to chime in?
So you were talking about kind of a new normal, and there's lots of different parts of what new normal looks like, and you kind of just described one. And there's another one that I'm kind of curious about. So we do program evaluation for nonprofits, and some of our nonprofits, I wouldn't say recently, it's over a few years now, have become hostile towards the funding organizations, because the funding organizations want to drive the work and the goals that the organizations do. And they're like, no, that's not what we do. Where did you come from? You know, you're not part of the community. Fund us and don't bother us, you know? And so, you know, I think I have heard that nationwide there is a slight inversion, a trend toward inverting this top-down behavior into a bottom-up thing, where people actually look at their community and what resources are there and what problems they're trying to solve, and funding those rather than, you know, trying to tell the community what's good for them. And I just wonder if what you see locally, is that taking hold, or, you know, what do you see?
I think there's some resistance to it, and there's some really great work being done where people are embracing that. I think we are finally, hopefully, as a society, figuring out that people in the midst of a challenge probably know that challenge best. People who are experiencing homelessness probably know what homelessness is most like and what would support their needs to be housed. People who have disabilities know best what support needs they have. You know, how can we center the community we support and grow the work out of that, rather than, as you said, a funder being like, okay, these are the outcomes we want to see. This is how you're going to deliver services. You know, all of these strings attached to it. I think that we've seen that the most effective work is centering that community. There are so many programs that there's all this data that's come out of, you know, people experiencing homelessness when they receive direct cash payments on a monthly basis. That has the greatest success rate of getting them housed, and it's the cheapest option for getting them housed. Things like that, where it's like, why are we reinventing the wheel for this group when we now have data that shows that reinventing the wheel is more expensive and less effective? And so I think when there is resistance to that, how can we find that data and show that to funders who are resistant to it, that it's not just sort of like a hippy dippy philosophy, but that it is backed by really hard, conclusive evidence. And so for each nonprofit, that evidence will be a little bit different, but showing when we do it this way, it's the most effective, and here's why, and here's the data to find that. And unfortunately, that's not available for every nonprofit, because we're all doing very different things. But that, in my experience, is the best way to convince people, because there isn't necessarily a lens where they see, oh, you told me this, so it's true. Sometimes it's that hard data that switches the mindset. But I think it's switching. Yvette?
Yes, there's definitely a range of understanding, willingness, openness. At one end, absolutely, there are funders who get it, who are shifting gears, who are open to that dialogue, to a more equitable relationship. And then there are those that are struggling or who would just really resist, and sort of everything in between. I think the only other thing I would add is that for those, we see that there are organizations whose staff understand this that we're talking about, but here's their challenge. Their challenge is in their donors as a foundation or as a larger organization that administers grants. So the first step was having the staff of that organization understand this basic paradigm shift. But what we're hearing from them is that they are struggling to get their donors to also understand the shift. And that the shift is that instead of the donors driving by virtue of, well, what are the numbers? You need to show me the numbers in order to show that there is effective grant making happening, right? Well, the reality is poverty isn't going to end tomorrow. It's not about throwing enough money. It is so systemic, and there are so many things that contribute. And there are so many concentric circles that are the consequences of that. And the challenges that we face as a society, and how do we take care of our most vulnerable? How do we take care of traditionally underserved communities, right? But some of the traditional paradigm for donors to those organizations is, well, I've been giving to you for 5 years, for 10 years, and we still have poor people.
Oh,
We
if
still
I hear
have
one more,
kids,
if I hear
right?
one more person say, I want a business model to solve these, intractable social problems, I'm going to start going Will Smith on them. I tell you, I'm tired of this stuff.
So you get what I'm saying, right? But even saying these words out loud that you're saying, that we're saying, needs to keep being spoken out loud at the Funders Forum this year, as we all go out into wherever our world is, right? That this is a truth that has not been spoken out loud for a long time. And so it helps the paradigm shift. Back to Jermaine's inquiry about how do we continue, Jermaine, we have to keep saying these words. We keep having the Funders Forum. We keep trying to stand in the truth. We keep trying to have evolving conversations and dialogue. We keep talking about what does it mean to look at fundraising, donor retention through an equity lens for the donor, for the corporation, for the foundation, for government entities, right? For the nonprofits seeking out relationships and seeking out funding. It is part of a larger puzzle, and we are committed to continuing the conversation.
I think a step in that direction, and I think everybody on this call knows it, but I'm not sure that the funders know it, is this difference between kind of a deficit perspective and an asset perspective, right? The folks here, they're like, all right, where do we got at the community? What are we going to pull together to help solve these problems? And I think that's where the top-down thing crashes with, the assets in the community. And so, changing that perspective at that level, I think would be really important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. And I think I'm so excited that people are having these conversations more and more, because I feel like so much of this went unsaid for so many years. I love this idea of an assets-based philosophy, and in the disability field, there is so much focus on deficits, unfortunately, and people with disabilities from the time that they are small, everything is outlined based on what they are not doing in comparison to a non-disabled peer. And everything's like, here's where you're falling short, and here's the benchmark you didn't meet, and here's the thing you're not doing, here's the thing you need help with. And I think when we look at the assets-based perspective, it not only puts us in this mindset of here are the things that are going well and that we can leverage for more success, it also puts us in mind that all of us have assets and all of us have deficits. And especially among those populations that nonprofits support, there's this mindset that if we do our job right, a lot of people won't need us eventually. And sometimes it's a conversation of saying, if we remove the supports, like in the disability field, oftentimes we're making the argument of fund our services, because if we cease to exist, here are the problems that result. And we've seen what happens when people are like, oh, this is solved, so we're gonna remove these funds from social programs. But what's real is we all need support, and we all need support throughout our lifetimes. And somehow when you are a person of means, if you have a personal assistant and a maid and a chef and all of these things, you are considered highly productive and amazing and worth congratulating. But if you are a person with a disability who needs someone in your home who helps you with cooking or helps you get transportation, you are looked down upon. And so I think looking at this assets-based framework, how can we look at, we all have assets and we all have support needs. All of us, might need childcare or might need in-home support as we age, or, we have mailmen because we need someone to deliver the mail for us, but that doesn't mean we're less than, that's a support need that the government provides. Things like that, when we look at this paradigm of top down, of I have it figured out and people who need support don't, we miss the ways in which we benefit from community support and from government support. And so I just love all these conversations that are happening. And I'm so excited. I feel like I've talked too much, but Yvette, feel free to chime in.
No, this was really great conversation. I feel like we're just getting started. So I really appreciate the opportunity to let us, on behalf of AFP, share with you some observations, but it's also really good to hear what you all are saying. So I don't know where we are at on time, so I don't want to go over, Robert.
You are absolutely, you ended it perfectly. So we are a little over time. It's 10:03. I just wanted to say a big, huge thank you to all of you for joining us today in this conversation. We were worried that we weren't having like an hour long, but we went over, so we're good. Yeah, so big, please, everyone who's still in the audience, please, big warm round of applause for Jessie and for Yvette today for sharing some of their findings over the pandemic and just having this really great generative conversation together with our audience. This is what we hope for a lot of the time with Impact and Coffee, is just to have this kind of conversation rather than like this PowerPoint with slides and thankfully no one's ever read off their slides, so that's good. But slides sometimes are, I think, like a hindrance to having an actual conversation. So I really appreciate folks today in the chat and just unmuting and just having a conversation today about what's going on with our sector and with our community. And like also just, this is a tipping point, I think, in a lot of ways. Like these are conversations that are, I think, long have needed to happen for a long time. So Michael, is there anything you want to add before we get going?
I'd just like to add, I'll drop the link again in the chat, but if you can please help us by filling out our community input survey so we can know how to better serve our Impact and Coffee community, we would really appreciate it.
Awesome, thank you. With that, we're just gonna close out today. We come back next week on April 12th. We have another Impact and Coffee. Yes, please take the survey, and big thanks again to Jessie and to Yvette for staying with us today and having this conversation, and to thank all of our audience members as well. So we'll be back on April 12th, and I hope everyone has a really great rest of your Tuesday. May all your lights be green. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Take care, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.